rude and
no,
check
please,
this because
go
I
ahead.
want to see about the damage.
There, so I know I gotta
please.
go back and...
I have no news, but I think this is because I'm not actually getting now new email, so I'll have to sit down with my phone and like completely. I'm going to turn my phone off because sometimes that helps. Sorry,
No,
but I just need to know if I need to go to the venue early and find out what the hell's happened to my amp or Julian's amp or. Okay, so let's just continue, and I'll turn the phone on while we're talking and try not to be rude.
It's all right. No, you've already been super gracious with your time, so I
don't even know what time it is, but whatever. It's fine. You know what? Julian's going to be here soon. He's going to practice a bit, and then we're going to try to eat. And maybe I'm going to try to eat with all the gentlemen of the quartet in the lobby.
Oh, cool.
It's no worries. Where else are we going to go? There's nothing around here. Well, you're
kind of isolated up here.
Yeah.
I mean, even the MIM is kind of isolated. There's not a ton of stuff.
It's like you have to go on this long road.
Yeah. I was really excited about that when it went up.
Road or something.
Yeah. I was excited about that when it went up, but again, it was like you're going there to go there.
Right.
There's not
pretty amazing place. I mean, I think maybe Julian had been there before, but when he and I played there, we only had time to run around through there. When Lowell took us through there, and we just had to go zoom, 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 zoom. Wow, this is amazing. Wow, look at this. Wow, okay, because it was closed, and he was just letting us snoop around.
I think they've still got that electric guitar exhibit up right now.
Okay.
Like just a history of the electric guitar.
Oh, God. Well, because what they had was only a partial interest, but the African and Indonesian and Southeast Asian instrument collection, whatever, blew my mind. Nice. Anyway.
There was... so I think I was wanting to go back a little bit because we talked about Ornette Coleman briefly, and one of the albums that I was listening to was, I think... It was Jazz Free, right? Because you just reversed the free jazz.
Well, that's Henry Kaiser's record. He didn't make himself a leader on that record. But that's a record Henry oversaw, and he booked the studio time. He put the band together, and we just improvised with various parameters that Henry generally set out. Mm-hmm. So I haven't actually listened to that record since the first time I listened to it. So
it was a great listen to me. For me, I thought it was fantastic. Do you... When you're setting out to make an album or you're composing, and of course my reference points are going to be completely different from yours because you're the composer and have a different palette that you're pulling from. But there was, and I'm trying to think of which one it was that I was listening to, but there was some point where even I was put in mind of like Anthony Braxton and some really some pretty seriously avant-garde stuff. But there's, do you, as you're when you're composing, are you composing to staff paper, or are you more composing in your mind, or what are you?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, a lot of times I think that the writing comes in various ways, and for me, the process of it varies, I should say. But I write pieces sometimes just to feature the improvisers. Mm. They aren't really particularly moving or anything, but they may create some sort of directives implicitly that can inspire or fire the imagination of an improviser that I'm playing with, mm-hmm. and that everybody gets to contribute, and I can get out of my own way, which falls into the other category, which I call my fascistic or didactic composing, where I'm basically writing and telling people specifics, gotcha. Sometimes very specific directions, and I'm trying to create an effect that is not just a compositional sweep, but a sonic effect or a resonance, a way to explore and honor overtones, and a way to maybe even potentially overwhelm the listener with the wonder of sound or with an emotional effect that is obviously purely subjective from my standpoint, whatever an emotional effect is.
Sure.
But if I can get close to that, I feel like I've succeeded. But quite often, in order to do that, I have to be kind of rigid as far as the directions I give musicians. I have to ask them to do very specific things in order to be happy as the composer, right? Whether those ideas come from my head first or they come from playing the guitar, sometimes I'll be playing and the next thing I know I've found this kind of cool riff or whatever. I love a good riff, and I love repeating a good riff endlessly at the end of a song, or some sort of having a song build to a sonic event that repeats at the end, like a chant, or put you in a trance or something. I've used this strategy, I guess you'd call it, or template, more times than I care to admit, but I do find it satisfying when it's effective. So it goes all the way back to a piece I wrote years and years ago when I was playing with my brother Alex and a man named Eric Von Essen on bass and piano and whatnot, and Jeff Gauthier on violin. We had a group called Quartet Music for 11 years or so, and I did a piece on our second record called Blood of the Rose that ends with this drone and this kind of vamp drone groove thing. And I think I've chased that basic strategy ever since. Lots of pieces of mine do this. And I just really like when I find a good riff. There's a piece on a Singer's record called, the record's called The Giant Pin, and there's a song called The Ballad of Devin Hoff. Devin Hoff being the bass player in the Singers at the time. And it's an open tune piece, and it ends, about halfway through the piece, it goes into a new section, which I think of sometimes when I ponder it as a kind of almost like Brazilian Led Zeppelin thing. And I don't mean Led Zeppelin like necessarily like heavy, but Led Zeppelin sort of more like the open-tuned acoustic Led Zeppelin.
Gotcha.
And then there's another part that reminds me of the band Polvo, who I was listening to a lot at the time, and another open-tuned band like a post-Sonic Youth band, Sonic Youth being crucially important to me. And then I try to record it, usually doubling the guitar or something, in order to ramp up the overtone factor or the dynamics of the piece, and hope that it's exciting to the listener and even potentially overwhelming and makes one gasp with the wonder and beauty of music or something. And a lot of times that comes from playing the guitar and coming up with something that I find really resonant or just captivating on some level. And other times, if it's a line, like a melodic, linear sort of thing, I tend to just write down what I'm hearing in my head and or play it on the guitar from singing the notes in my head or singing them out loud, so now that way they're just the melody that I was hearing rather than what I know how to play. So, but it varies, you know. There's a piece on the Currents Constellations that Julian and I did as a duo as well called Aminette, and it's basically just called that because it's kind of like an Ornette line, and it has a melody that reminds me of a Scott Amendola piece called Street Beat, and it's just one of those pieces that's an excuse to play free jazz, essentially.
Gotcha.
And it's swift unison guitar stuff, which can be exciting and hopefully not too wanky.
That's, it's interesting that you mentioned the riff. There's, to kind of go back briefly to Impossible Germany. That's that opening and closing riff. No matter how many times I've heard that song, sends like chills down my spine. It's just this. I would love to be able to learn how to play that. I am seriously lacking as a guitarist. And
I could show it to you. It's really easy. But I actually, now that you're mentioning that song, and I've told the story of how that song came to be what it is many, many times. I think Jeff came up with that opening riff. It might have been Pat and Jeff. I came up with these melodies that I was going to present to Jeff as things that he and I would play together, and there was to be no guitar solo in the song. And it completely went another direction. I believe it was the first time Pat picked up a guitar and started playing guitar, and Wilco was on that song. But I actually, now that you're mentioning that opening riff, I don't remember where that came from, and I'm sure Jeff and Pat could help me with this. Were they here? But I think it might have been Pat and Jeff that came up with that. And then what I'd written, because the song existed before Pat and I were ever in the band, so there was a demo of this song that it was just sort of sitting around waiting to be something.
Gotcha.
And so I came up with this idea of having a long instrumental coda at the end, but it was to be more like The Dream's Dream by Television, where it's all worked out. So I basically came up with the that and I had come up with a bunch more, but we never made it past the two lines. And I certainly don't remember any of the other lines I had, but that opening riff, I mean, let's face it, and I'm not patting myself on the back because I really had very little to do with it. That is a real success story where three guitars can play and play together and stay out of each other's way when we're not playing together. And it wasn't really we didn't worry about it too much. It seemed to just sort of happen. I just think everyone kind of knew what to do and what not to do. But my memory is a little foggy now because it did take a while in the early phase to sort of arrive at what it is. But it's satisfying to me.
That's I mean,
because I like guitar sounds.
It's there are those songs that are just great headphone songs, and that's a great headphone song.
Oh, interesting. Well, I haven't heard the actual album version in quite some time. I keep hearing from people that they hear it like in the world, which I find interesting because, of course, there was no single,
right?
And that's one of the longer songs on the record, if not the longest song. So I tend to be rather surprised. I keep finding out that it's being played. Like my brother heard it once in the CVS pharmacy.
Oh, wow.
Waiting to get a prescription or something.
That seems an odd place to hear.
People have heard it in airports, and I'm kind of amazed by this. But the tone that I selected for that solo is not a tone I like. It's a tone I thought the song needed or wanted. It's trebly. I'm not a treble guy. It's bridge pickup. It's that. That it's a rock tone. It's I like a jazz, dark, smoother tone, or just full on distortion generally. So I'm generally uncomfortable playing the solo because of that.
It's pretty funny.
But it's a little bit like, to me, the tone's inspired, I guess, by or a touchstone, you would say, maybe to the tone is Dickie Betts, from the Allman Brothers Band in the early days. Not Dwayne, who is my hero, but something about Dickie comes through, I think, in that solo, and Tom Verlaine, but Tom Verlaine doesn't play with distortion at all, and there is some distortion on that solo, but stylistically, melodically, I think there's an aspect of both those gentlemen in the solo, and certainly other maybe not guitarists, just after listening to a million saxophones or something,
That's the combination of Current's Constellations. When I started listening to jazz, of course I started listening to, I would listen to Miles, and probably my entrance into jazz was Chet Baker.
Oh, interesting.
And so then, and I listened to and enjoyed, Coltrane and all that. But I quickly discovered that my favorite records were ones that were